In today's video, we're going to learn how to make the economy quilt block. Now, this is one that's super duper easy, but it's going to look fancy and it's going to look complicated. We're going to actually learn two different methods. We're going to learn this method first, which again looks complicated, but I promise you that it is not. And we're also going to learn how to make one like this, which is essentially the same method but different. So if you stick around, you can see exactly what I'm talking about. But in today's video, we'll do both. So grab your sewing gear and let's get to it. So first off, you're going to want to go to your scrap bin and get some pieces of fabric because, you know, we're always about scrappy over on this channel. But this is actually a nice project if you want to do what's called fussy cutting. And fussy cutting is taking a piece of fabric and you actually want to highlight a specific design element of the fabric. So out of all of the pieces that I had, I decided to use this little checkered heart. So I went ahead and cut a 3-inch square around that heart. So this is going to be the centralized part of our first economy square. So basically what we're going to be doing is we're going to be adding triangles to the outsides of this square. But in the first method, what we're going to do is it's going to be square in square. But for your second piece of scrap, you want to make sure that it is as big as your center square. You're going to line those up pretty sides together, and then you're going to do a 1/4 inch seam allowance at your machine. Now the way that I sewed this is I actually started a 1/4 inch from the edge and just did a straight seam all the way to about a 1/4 inch to the other edge. Honestly, I believe that you could probably go all the way edge to edge, but I haven't made one of these blocks in a really long time and I was trying to remember how everything goes. But anywho, you're just going to go and you're going to do a square all the way around your central square. Now, once you get done with sewing that 1/4 inch seam allowance, you're going to go ahead and trim up your scraps to make sure that they're the same size. I'm using my rotary cutter because I love it and it is one of the best tools in the sewing world, in my opinion. There's a lot of tools out there, but a rotary cutter is definitely top tier for me. So now this is what you're left with, the front and the back of your central square. So essentially what you're going to be doing is you're going to be separating these two layers. You're going to be cutting a cross shape into your backer piece, and then you're going to be cutting your flaps like this. So it does take a little bit of, working with it, but what you'll want to do is make sure that you have those two layers separated. And you're also going to want to draw your X that you're going to cut on your backer piece or on the scrap that you added to your centerpiece. So since this was a dark fabric, what I ended up doing was taking a piece of chalk to do my markings because my blue pen wouldn't show up very well. But what you're going to do is just go diagonally from one corner to the other and make a mark in both sides. Now, once you make your mark, you're going to want to go ahead and separate those layers again, and you're going to cut only on the second scrap piece. So you're not going to want to cut through your center one. And hopefully this will make sense, but you're just going to want to cut and follow those lines. So I get a little tiny pair of scissors and get the cut started. And then I just follow the marks or the chalk lines that you made to get your diagonals cut. But make sure to take your time, and when you get to those corners, don't cut the stitches that you did in the previous step because that is not the way to go. So now once you get those flaps cut, you can open things up and you can see that your central square is now inside of another square and it has little diagonals on it. Isn't that just cute? I think that's pretty neat. So you're going to go ahead and give that a good press. Now, once you've given your square a good press, you're going to go ahead and get your next square measured. Now, at this point, the size of our entire block is going to be 3.5 by 3.5. And I got my little ruler out just to double check that, but it's approximately that size. Things do get a little wonky whenever you do your block this way, but it is close to a 3.5 by 3.5 inch square. So for the next piece that you're going to add, you're going to do the exact same process. You're going to grab a scrap that is as big as that 3.5 by 3.5, and you're going to put pretty sides together and do the exact same process. 1/4 inch seam allowance all the way around the square. Gonna go ahead and get everything trimmed down like we did before. I got the ruler out to make sure I didn't get all crazy with it, but like I said before, it does get a little bit kind of wild, just a little bit. But of course, in Festina Land, we like a little chaos around here. Same thing we're going to do here. I did actually use my marking pen for this time because it was a lighter fabric, but you're just going to go diagonal to diagonal and then cut your triangles out, press, and repeat. You're basically going to do this the entire way until you get the block the size that you want it to be. I actually did not make this block as large as I thought that I was going to, but you'll see how the layers really unfold once you get your squares and you get your diagonals cut out. And this is definitely a good time to make sure that you are pressing and getting everything nice and flat as possible, since it does tend to be a little bit all over the place. Right now my square is now 4 inches by 4 inches, so every time that we add a square, we are adding 1/2 inch to the size of the square. So that is a little bit of math that you can take into consideration whenever you want to make your square as big as you need it to be. So I did continue to add a few layers here and there, picked out some colors that was like, oh, well, look at this and look at this. So just trying to coordinate some things. I'm not huge on coordinating fabrics all the time. Sometimes I am, but sometimes I just feel like doing a little bit of randomness, which is actually what this block kind of turned into. But you can see as you add squares to the block, you want to keep the orientation of that center square into focus so that it goes the way that you want it to go. Now I got to this last layer, and for whatever reason I sewed it backwards, as meaning that the pretty side was not next to the other pretty side. I don't know. I don't know what happened there, but that's me looking at it like, what in the world did I just do? But what's interesting about that fabric is you can't really tell, which is probably why I messed up, but it's okay. I was like, I am not unpicking this. But what I did do was I went all the way for the square to be 4.5 by 4.5 inch square, which is the size of my ruler. There was a point in time where I got a little bit of puckering when I was sewing, and that is something else to be aware of, is that when you are sewing on triangles, you're sewing on the bias of the material, and it does tend to be stretchier than if you are sewing with the grain of the fabric. So That's one of the reasons why things do get a little wonky the bigger that you go. But what I ended up doing was I stopped here and I got everything as squared up as I could. The final size of the block ended up being 5.5 by 5.5 inches square. And now what's fun with this is that you can add a border to it. Hey, you do you, whatever you want to do on this block, and that is how it will turn out. Now I'm going to give you an alternative way of making this block, which is a little bit different. And I actually wasn't even going to do this part of the video, but I decided to add it in because I think that it would be valuable. And I do apologize about my camera being out of focus. I had turned it off in between these shots and I messed with my lens and I didn't fix it until later. So I do apologize about that. But on this method, it goes a little bit different. And what you're going to do is you can start out with your center square. Again, I'm starting with a center square that is 3 inches by 3 inches. And you are going to be adding the diagonals directly to this square versus cutting them out. So there is a lot of math and there's templates and there's all sorts of fancy things that go along with doing it this way. But what I did was for my second piece, I took 2 squares that were exactly the same size as my middle one, and I went ahead and cut them on the diagonal. Then I am adding them to the top and the bottom of my block. Now you do want to do these in opposite sides, like you want to do like top and bottom or left and right. And I lined up the centers of my diagonal pieces to the center of my square. I just lined it up on my ruler desk table mat thing, but you can also take your diagonal and your square and you can kind of press it in the center and kind of go from there. But however which way that you want to find the center of your diagonal and the center of your square, do it that way. But once I got the centers lined up, I went ahead and clipped them into place and took it to my machine to sew a 1/4 inch seam allowance on both of those sides. Now, once you get the 1/4 inch sewn on both of those sides, you're going to do the exact same process on the remaining sides of your square. So you're going to take your diagonals, find the centers, clip, pin those together, and then you're going to go to your machine and sew 1/4 inch seam allowance. And now you can already see how different this method looks versus the first method. And it all depends on how you want your block to look. If you want more of the triangle sides pieces to show through, you may want to go with this method. So this is what you're going to have, and this is what it's going to look like whenever you get all of your diagonals sewn onto your middle piece. And you can see just how different it looks right now. But what we're going to do is we're going to cut off our little dog ears, get everything nice and pressed, and then we will continue on adding in the exact same method as we did with those pieces. Right now you can also see that the square that I have is much larger than it was before. Right now my square is looking like it's about 4 inches by 4 inches versus just the 3.5 that we had in the first method. But we'll trim off those dog ears and then we will go ahead and find us a scrap piece that we can add to those edges. So I know that there's a better way and a better formula to try to figure out what sizes that you need. But since this was a 4 1/4, was a little bit more than 4 inches, so it's like 4 1/4. What I did was I just cut 2 more squares that were that size, cut them on the diagonal, lined them up like before, and then kind of went with it. But again, I haven't done anything like this in a very, very, very long time, but I saw it recently on social media and it really brought me back. And I was like, those are fun squares to do. Why don't I share that with everybody here? But Yeah, what you're gonna do is you're gonna line up everything like before. I'm lining up my diagonal corners, my little edges with the diagonals of my center square, and just making sure that everything is marked up. And then I'm gonna go back to the machine, 1/4 inch seam allowance, press it, and keep on trucking. Now, once you get everything lined up, sewn together with your 1/4 inch seam, pressed, trim your little dog ears, get everything blocked up like it should, then that is the second method of the economy square. With putting them side by side, you can definitely see the differences of how they look. Like I said, it all depends on the look that you want for your block. Like this one looks like there was so much that went into it, but clearly it's the same method, just done a little bit differently. So if you want to have more of the fabrics showing, then you do the second version, but if you like it more detailed, you've got that first version that you can also do as well. But I hope that you enjoyed this tutorial. Like, share, subscribe if you'd like to see more of these tutorials, and I hope to see you next time.